Hey,
Yeah.
hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. So I'm just gonna pour myself some water. How are
It's all
you?
good. I'm good. I was gonna maybe start by apologizing that I'm a bit ill currently. So if I sound strange, that's why. And also I might have to take some breaks to like cough and stuff, which is kind of lame, but we'll manage.
Don't worry. I just went to the doctor because I think I'm ill as well, and I was coughing and
Oh
like
no.
going around. So yeah. Other than that, how have you been?
Good. Yeah, good. Busy with work. I'm working full time at the moment, so I'm trying to kind of manage that and like having a practice of my own at the same time. So yeah, that's always something to grapple with, I guess.
Do you want to do like a quick introduction of
Yeah,
yourself? Yeah.
yeah, sounds good. Um, so my name is Sabina. I like to sort of define myself as a critical designer and researcher, and I specialize in sound-driven interactive experiences. Most of my work focuses on topics of ecology and environments, and there's a lot of speculation involved as well. And I have a transdisciplinary process. I experiment and explore a lot of different things, but mostly I look at non-anthropocentric futures and feminist technoecologies. And I do that primarily through sonic compositions, storytelling, so writing, and world building. But I've also done interactive audiovisual installations in the past. I've worked with new media, films, design fictioning, and I just generally like to investigate the sort of entanglement between fiction and digital technologies and the interactive imaginaries that this sort of entanglement brings about through collective practice mostly. And I've had work exhibited at the Science Gallery in London before, as well as at the Ars Electronica Festival in Linz. And I also work for a design studio here in London. So yeah, that's what I do.
You just finished a degree at UAL, right? The MA Interactive
Yes.
Design degree. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that like?
It was really good. I really liked it. I think I was very scared going into it because my BA is in graphic design, which is nothing like what I did at LCC. But it was something that I wanted to do for a really long time. Like when I was doing graphic design in my BA, I came across the course because this girl at my university went to do it like right after their BA. Shout out Joanna, if you see this ever. But basically, I would see what she was doing on the course, and I remember like seeing her work for the first time as part of that, and just sort of being like, "This is so weird. What is that? Like, I want to do that." And I kind of went into it like knowing that it was about emerging technologies and kind of their intersection with design and sort of art practice, but not knowing how to do that. And so like I had a really interesting time sort of trying to figure that out. And yeah, I loved it. I think it was like literally one of the best things that I did for my practice, to be honest with you. It was really cool.
Are you kind of continuing along the same stuff that you were doing in a degree now, or are you changing directions a little bit?
I think I'm trying to do the same stuff. Like I'm trying to stay in that kind of critical, more sort of academic leaning space, but I'm also trying to figure out how to take that thinking into the design industry, especially around all of this stuff around emerging technologies and like artificial intelligence specifically. I think a lot of industry people don't really know how to approach that or don't really understand either the potential or the dangers for that. So trying to find ways to articulate what I do within my own practice that sort of relates to that is interesting to me. So yeah.
I took a look at the video game a little from what was available on your Substack and read up a little bit
Yeah,
on that. Super cool. Oh my God. But like
thank you.
I did try to play it, and it's just like it's like a bunch of audio pieces basically in the text.
Yeah.
Is that like how it was presented when it was presented, or was there like another
No, like
aspect?
yeah, so there's definitely like another aspect to it. I think it's difficult with that kind of format because originally it's like a live action role playing game. And so what I did for the grad show, because that is like the only instance that I've exhibited that work in like currently, was I created almost like pockets of the world that was described by the sound. So I had imagined this environment and like the narrative and sort of played with the sound, and then based off of the way that the sound was built, I took kind of inspiration from the different material qualities of the sound. So if I had used, let's say, a sound sample of, I don't know, like leaves, someone stepping or like walking in on a forest floor, that kind of influenced the material building of the different structures. And so you would like go around this almost like game cycle. I think I've described it at different points in the thing that I sent you to read. Yeah, so like at different points in that game cycle, you have NFC tags. And that's how you access the different chapters of the game. So you start off by getting an introduction and then getting different clues about the next sort of object that you have to find in the cycle. And then you would navigate the gallery space, and then you would find that object in another kind of part of sort of physical world building around the sound material that I was working with. And then you would progress through it.
Yeah. So it was like, well, as actually as Andrea would say, cybernatural.
Kind of,
like,
yeah.
like existing in the physical space, but it's also correlated to like a
Yeah.
digital geography, I guess. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Why did you choose to use NFC tags?
Because I had like so little options in terms of like the technology that could be used, and like there were also restrictions, I guess, around like power usage. So like in gallery shows in general, there's like a limit of like how many power plugs you can use and how many things you can hook up to power. And also I knew that I was going to use up a lot of space with just the stuff that I had built, like the physicality of the game and the environment that it was in. So I wanted it to be as flexible as possible in terms of exhibiting it. And also like NFC stuff is pretty effective, and also it's most smartphones have it, so it's like accessible in that way. It just took like a bit of guiding, I guess, for the audience to understand how to like place their phone on stuff, and like even just the language I was using, like when people were struggling with things, I was like, oh, it's like how when you tap on the tube, and they're like, oh, okay, cool. And so like people would automatically sort of get it, and then they wouldn't need that much, I guess, hand holding as part of the experience. So that's mostly why I used it, and also because I could make a little website for it and sort of host stuff myself rather than put it on like SoundCloud, and then people have to sort of mess around with the SoundCloud UX. And it's, yeah, I just wanted it to sort of be like streamlined in a way, and like for people to not have to push as many buttons or make it sort of like button driven or whatever. Yeah.
How did the like LARP factor in? Like, did you do LARP at some point, or did you just kind of like happen upon it online?
I sort of happened upon it online. I guess a lot of the writing that I did for that specific project was inspired by sort of writing communities online, specifically Reddit. Like if you know the subreddit No Sleep, that has a lot of stuff, like a lot of creative writing exercises where people sort of write in first person, and they have this almost like non-verbal agreement of like everybody pretends that whatever's written on this platform is real. Um, and sort of it came from like a string of stories that I found on No Sleep that were around US park rangers and like different uncanny strange things that they would find. So that was kind of the origin of it. Like I really liked that sort of like writing exercise, and then I wanted to see if I could transpose it sonically and then also in space with an audience. So yeah, that was kind of how I came into it. And also like my housemate, for example, was like a dungeon master. So like I would sometimes infiltrate his like D&D campaigns to sort of like learn a bit about it that way, but I wasn't super into it as like a participant. Like I liked the idea of it and like the sort of theory behind it, but yeah, it made D&D makes me kind of shy sometimes. I don't
know. That's really interesting. I've never heard of like LARPing in a written form, you know, when you're just like on a forum and you just participate.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And like there's also like a darker side to it. There's this guy called Philip Speakman that I really like the work of, and he basically wrote this thing about how it was like a lecture. It's on Vimeo. I can send it to you later. But basically, he had this essay around how stuff like QAnon are actually just like massive LARPs in written form. Like this idea of like or like all of these sort of 4chan communities started as like writing exercises that were then sort of taken out of context and then became massive conspiracies, which may be a bit of a stretch, but like the way that he articulates it is much better and much more interesting. But yeah, there's a lot of like weird stuff online about that, but the sort of like writing LARP aspect of it is really interesting.
Yeah, that's so strange. Oh my God. I would love to learn more about the QAnon stuff, because that is also very like uncanny and I wonder if that was like an intention. I mean, like it just, I guess it just brings up like you know, the way that we interact with stuff that's like not meant to be seen by us, you know, and like infiltrating a community in that sense, and how it gets misread. So I feel like there's space on the internet where you have that sort of feeling where you're just like, I mean, any space on Reddit, I get that sort of feeling. I'm like, I'm looking at something that doesn't make sense within my framework, and I have to like enter a different framework to like make sense of this thing. And I guess LARP is that, but just taken to its like natural endpoint. Yeah. How do you think that like served to illustrate the theory that you were pulling from, and like the, I guess, the theoretical advance that you're trying to build?
You mean like the LARPing aspect with the sound specifically and the sort of spatial kind of creation of the sound?
Yeah.
I mean, I was looking at sort of theories of embodiment for a very long time, and I was trying to find a way to sort of talk about this idea of the nature-culture divide and do it in a way that isn't necessarily visual. Like that was kind of my starting point, because I was thinking, like, I think I started off with the concept of hyperreality and sort of wanted to think about it in terms of sound and not so much images. But then I couldn't find a lot about sound and hyperreality online. So then I kind of tried to figure out a practical framework to sort of explore that within, and then that became live action role playing. And I think it also helps people kind of engage with spaces differently. And kind of when I was doing the sort of intro about me and talking about collective imaginaries and collective practice, I think that's where the audience comes in, like with the sound stuff that I was doing for that project. Like I was giving them these pockets of world building of like things that they could touch and see that were in the space around them. And the rest of it, they had to sort of imagine and create like the connections between the different micro environments that I was giving them and the way that they were navigating the game. So I guess that was like an integral part of trying to represent that theory, was the audience actually sort of making that connection for themselves.
Did you, so you were a graphic designer before?
Yeah.
And then you kind of veered into this like slowly. Was there like, so there was just a point in which like, I guess, like, were you just kind of like, I'm bored of images? Like, was that what it was? Or like, no,
yeah, I mean, I think there was definitely a bit of that. Like I was like, while I was still studying graphic design, I was trying to find, again, ways of practicing that were going sort of beyond typography and print and web design in these sort of standard forms. I was also kind of really upset about how, I guess, money driven the industry of graphic design is, and trying to sort of merge graphic design and artistic practice, which when I was, 19 doing my degree, I thought were two very separate things. But now I feel like they're a bit more connected just based off of the stuff that I'm doing now. But yeah, I was exploring with like trying to find ways of making my work more interactive, or making, static print media more interactive. I think when I was studying graphic design at the time that I was studying it, the most interactive you could be with it was doing motion design, for example, in a way that was still marketable to the industry. And like, that's what was being taught in universities at the time. But I was trying some things out with like augmented reality, for example, trying to find different ways of being more interactive. And then I came across MA interaction design. And I was like, okay, this is really, really interesting. There's not that much that I know about this. How can I sort of cater my practice into being more like this? Also kind of in preparation for sort of entering the course. And then once I started it, I realized, you know, this is like one of the only opportunities that I have to really be explorative. Like academia is a very, you know, despite I guess the money factor of having to pay for university, it's like a very safe space to sort of explore. Because also not many sort of design studios have an infrastructure to support designers to explore, especially when it comes to client-facing projects. Like it's very risky from a business standpoint, I suppose. And so my plan was like, I don't know if I want to do a PhD at any point. This is the only chance I've got to make weird shit. And then I just sort of started doing that. And I was like, I don't really know much about sound. I don't play any instruments. I can't read music. All I know about music is that it sounds good and I like it. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try to do sound stuff. I'm going to really try to push myself and like figure out if I can use this medium effectively, if I can understand the theory behind it, if I can use the theory that I already know and sort of like plug it into this medium, see what happens. And then it became like a really nice container sort of for exploration. And then everything around it that was interactive sort of happened to fit with the sound stuff that I was doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it's a totally different perspective to have rather than like when you're not like a sound artist or a DJ and stuff like that. You're just like playing. It was really like a play, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Which you're starting from scratch, and also starting from your like intuitions around like your own like feelings, sounds, and like you said, music feels good.
Yeah, no, it does. It literally does. And that was like my only sort of motivation was like, I understand the things that I like. And like, I know that there's a discrepancy between my taste and sort of the technical level that I have with certain things. But I was like, this is the only, or might be the only opportunity that I have to actually sort of develop this. And it's not actually that hard. And the sort of play aspect of it was really great because, you know, I mean, it was kind of harder to justify in an academic context, like when I had to submit stuff, because I was just kind of like, I pushed some buttons and made some sounds and it just happened and it worked. But then, yeah, I sort of started developing a more thorough sort of methodology for it, and I was able to start articulating it a bit better. Yeah, and also change the relationship that I have with like just listening to things generally. Like I'm so much more in tune with sound now, I guess, and like sort of predominantly visually experiences, which is most of like the norm of what art is, I suppose. Especially in like gallery settings. Sometimes it's very difficult to engage with it beyond what it's showing you, like in the first instance. So having, you know, the sound aspect of it, I think is really interesting. And also sound in a lot of art contexts is very much like an afterthought. Like you make something and then you make a sound for it to kind of support whatever you're trying to say in the first place. So I wanted it to sort of be the principal medium for once for me to use.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like sound is kind of inherently more immersive than like imagery in some way? Or
I don't necessarily think it's more immersive. I think it's more embodied, because you can feel the vibration of it, and it's also time driven. So like it requires more of you. Like I think with images, you can look at them for however long you want, and if it's not like a video, of course, like it'll just be that. But I think sound is a lot, like it takes a lot more focus as well, and it like stimulates you in a different way, perhaps, because again, you're kind of engaging your imaginary when you're engaging with sound.
do you think that correlates in some way with like the sensory experiences that posthumanism kind of tries us to recall, or like the theory that you pulled from with Morton and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think so. Especially because like theorists like Morton give a lot of sort of examples of sound, or like most of the academics that I look at are very sort of driven by culture in the sense that they'll give examples of works, and they won't just sort of focus on theory. Like they'll be like, here's how this artist, for example, applies it, or here's how somebody's practice influenced this way of thinking, which is really helpful when you're, I guess, interested in theory, but also a practitioner yourself trying to figure out how to materialize all of these concepts. But yeah, I think definitely, and like Timothy Morton was like a big one. Then a lot of stuff that Mark Fisher wrote, that was also like a big sort of influence on what I was doing. And a lot of them sort of talk about sound as a way to engage the body more.
Mm-hmm. Mark Fisher, were you pulling from ontology and that sort of thing? Or? Yeah. What are you kind of looking to do next?
Ooh, I mean, I'm looking to actually do more writing. Like I did a lot of writing for my degree, and just my own work. Like I do a lot of thinking through writing, which is very time consuming, and I don't get to do it as often now that I'm not doing the MA anymore. But for example, I'm actually in the process of writing something for Sound Art Lab, if you know them. They're this Danish sound organizations. They do like residencies and stuff, but they also do a biennial. So I'm writing something for them that's about artificial intelligence and Romanian folklore, but from a sound perspective. So looking at sonic Romanian folklore, and then the embodiment of artificial intelligence through voice synthesis. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Wait, what is voice synthesis? Like constructing voices in AI?
Yeah, so like how ChatGPT has a voice function now, so it's not text-based anymore. Yeah.
How does that connect to the sonic folklore?
So basically the connection that I'm sort of trying to make is this idea that Romanian folklore like has a very strong sort of sound foundation. And so a lot of the sort of oral storytelling that we do and the different songs that we have and the different chants that we have also have a material counterpart. So for example, there's different figures that we embody. Like some people call it figures of the savage, but like I don't really like using the term savage in that context because it's literally like a bear or like a goat or like different animals that represent different things and that are used in different contexts for different celebrations. But there's a very strong sort of sonic aspect to it. And then I'm trying to link that practice with sort of incipient sonic technologies that sort of stemmed from cybernetics and how cybernetics were used in the military industrial complex. Like, for example, during the Vietnam War, there was this operation called Wandering Soul, where the US military took different voice recordings and sort of, for example, Buddhist funeral music and created this like really eerie tape recordings that were used to keep Vietnamese soldiers from sleeping and to draw them out of hiding, because a lot of them believed that it was their ancestors that have passed, sort of telling them to come out of hiding, and then they would inevitably get killed. But it was like this manipulation and kind of weaponizing of folklore. Because in Vietnamese culture, from my understanding of it, if someone passes and does not receive a proper burial, they're believed to still inhabit the living world. And so the US military kind of used those recordings to weaponize that belief. And so this idea of like cybernetics and folklore and the sort of impact it can have. But then I'm also linking it to like kind of sillier things, like, you know, those TikTok sounds that are like, use this sound now for like infinite fortune, or like if you don't use the sound within like 5 minutes, you know, so it's like that embodiment of artificial intelligence online kind of done through this like robotic voice, or even just like the cultural recognition of an AI voice as an AI voice, or like, you know, people instantly recognizing what Siri sounds like or what ChatGPT sounds like now. So yeah, there's like links between all of these things, I think.
Crazy. It reminds me of this podcast. I've brought up Joshua Citrella on the show before, but like, there's this podcast he started now, like this series, about another CIA operation in which they basically tried to use binaural beats to like create soldiers who could astral project. So, and there was this, like, he had this whole kind of like ontological framework of like what the afterlife looks like and stuff like that, according to the experiences that people would have after they encounter binaural beats. And they like pitched this to the CIA, and the CIA was like, yeah, because obviously it was the Cold War at the time. I think this was like the 70s. And so they wanted to like kind of weaponize it. Yeah, I guess it kind of reminds me of the video game as well, in the sense that like the sound like functioned as a transportive mechanism. Yeah, but they were doing weird stuff. I guess that's actually really, really upsetting to hear. Did they use the recordings in the end, the ones that you're talking about in the
Vietnam War? They did. And I guess like the effect of them was debatable. Like I've read these articles online about the US military being like, yeah, they were incredibly effective, and we, you know, successfully did psychological warfare, which is like a ridiculous thing to say. But obviously, like, there are no accounts of that actually happening from, I guess, soldiers that were part of that, but it is known for them to have been used. And they still exist. Like the recordings, the tape's still there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Do you see like, so what's the, oh, it's a writing piece. It's a written piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your writing process like? Are you gonna do more like academic piece, or what are you kind of veering towards?
Yeah, I think it's predominantly academic. There's like a bit of sort of storytelling in the beginning of just my experience of the sound aspect of Romanian folklore. Because a lot of it, like, it is documented online, but it's also just, you know, folklore sort of passed through storytelling. And so there's not, I guess, an insane amount of resources. But yeah, so I talk a bit about that, about my experience kind of hearing it, I guess, in the city, because I grew up in Bucharest, Romania. And so there was like a very sort of big disconnect between how the city looked and these sort of like mythical creatures that were coming out, and like the almost like conjuring of protection, because that's most of what sonic folklore does, is like linked to this idea of banishing evil spirits. And so that's why it's so loud and kind of overtly almost like fear mongering in a way. And so I write a bit about that, and then sort of going into the theory aspect of it, and I'm sort of bringing some practitioners into it as well, kind of discussing different works around thinking about sound with AI.
It also kind of makes me think, like, I mean, folklore itself is the product of like however many generations of people telling the same story over and over in various iterations, and I guess that's also kind of like AI. In a sense that it's like a database of information that's been told and told over again.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the sort of link that I'm trying to make as well. And thinking about ways in which AI can contribute, I guess, to the new production of folklore, or like things like digital folklore, again, having such a big database, and like AI not being like a decentralized thing. Like, I think a lot about stuff like there's a lot of people that I've heard that are like, oh, we got to take back the algorithm. And like, what does that mean? You know, like AI has a different agency, and like a very specific type of agency that is very difficult to grasp. And so even thinking about stuff like AI hallucinations or misinformation or disinformation, and how this stuff is used either purposefully or not, when it comes to all of the things that are online, and thinking of folklore, it's like, how does that generate sort of new storytelling and new kind of world building ecologies in online spaces. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And like, I did want to sort of link it with Romanian sound folklore, just because I'm very familiar with that. And it's also like a very sort of embodied type of knowledge, which I think is really interesting. Rather than, yeah, something that is necessarily easily accessible online.
Do you think AI can make something new?
I don't think it can necessarily make something entirely new. I think that maybe the way we perceive it, or the way future generations will perceive it, is going to feel novel, but I don't think it's going to be new. I don't know if I believe that anybody can make anything like truly new anymore, and I don't necessarily think that's important. Like I don't think newness is incredibly important anymore, in an artistic sense. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that? Because that's like a really interesting question.
Can AI make something new?
Yeah.
Well, I kind of agree with what you said, that like I don't think it's possible to really make that many new things anymore, if anyone ever really could. So in that sense, it definitely can be an interesting mechanism, but I do think that for a very long time it's still gonna have to be guided by some, human
Yeah.
hand to like induce that, I guess, hallucination that something new. Yeah. If you don't think that novelty is important, which I kind of share with you, what do you think is important for art now?
Oh my God, you're asking really easy questions, Esther. Maybe connection, like this idea of communal practice and like making something with participants rather than kind of separating people from yourself into an audience. I think that's what's important, especially when it comes to that thing that I said about like taking back the algorithm or like thinking about different ways of engaging with technology. Like I don't AI is already such a like individual thing, in the sense that it's sort of made with individualism in mind, like to cater to your needs as a user. And so like I'm wondering like what designers and art practitioners and sort of critical thinkers can do to actually put things into practice and like redefine or remodel the way we engage with artificial intelligence systems. Because I think there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of kind of desire to mobilize, but there's not that much that changes in our ways of using these technologies, especially because maybe we don't know enough about them to kind of subvert them. And the people that do that are most of the time art practitioners, and then maybe it leaves audiences or participants thinking like, what can I do? And it doesn't offer as much guidance beyond here's how I do it. Here's how I, create my art, let's say, with an AI model, or here's how I engage with an LLM, for example. So yeah, I think that's what's important. I don't know. Also like having fun maybe when making stuff. Like I know it maybe sounds like I'm infantilizing everything, but it's also like stuff sucks. Just try to have fun, try to like have that element of play, I guess, because I think that's what's also something that can't really be monopolized. Maybe like if people have a sense of play about things, it's a lot easier to maybe subvert these technologies than if we were to be like really serious and kind of methodical about them. Like, play can't really be predicted, which is what a lot of these things are meant to do. So yeah, that's what's important.
Could you give an example of the practitioners you were talking about who do try and kind of communalize AI?
Yeah. So for example, one of the people that I look at a lot is Jennifer Walsh. And she originally started as an improv musician, if I'm not mistaken. And then she became really interested in artificial intelligence systems. And now she does a lot of performances with AI. One of the ones that I really like is called Ultra Chunk. And it's where she basically created a database of herself. Like she recorded herself singing like through her webcam, and then she trained a model on that information, on that database that she created, and basically she performs with that model. And the really interesting thing about it, I guess, also maybe potentially terrifying, is that she tries to emulate the material that that model produces of her. So her own embodied performance of herself becomes very machinic because she's trying to replicate the system that in the end replicates itself, and then at one point just breaks, because it's like, you know, it's like this constant sort of feedback loop between her and the system, which is really interesting. Yeah, and even just like her kind of creating that data set of herself is really interesting. Like kind of taking ownership of that data and curating it herself.
It's very like hedostayal, like the
Yeah,
idea of the form, like repeating it, and like not deconstructing, but maybe turning the medium into an object for play.
Yeah.
So funny. Wow. Oh my god, I had something else to ask, but now I've lost the plot. Christ. The question I ask every time: how did you find everyone as a girl?
I found you through Nella, I think, because she posted something about you guys, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then you were doing like open calls for speakers, and I was like, I want to do that. That would be so fun. So yeah, I think that's how I found you, either through Nella or just like I found you on Instagram for sure. I think it was through Nella, like as like a starting point. Yeah.
How do you think that what we're doing like connects to your work, or like what you're exploring in your work? Do you think it like has a connection in some way, like or like why did you think we were really cool, basically? Yeah,
because I liked the sort of links that you were pulling between I guess like critical writing and AI, and also like the different people you were bringing together. Like again, that idea of like communal practice and like you bringing different I guess thinkers and creative practitioners together to kind of show like an alternative way of thinking about technology and art and just like I guess life online. Um and I also like just the idea of like everyone is a girl and kind of like this link to femininity. For example, I'm non-binary, so like femininity has always been like a strange thing for me, I guess, or like not strange in the sense that I don't identify with it, but I look very feminine outwardly, and so like it's sometimes difficult to reconcile that with I guess my gender identity maybe. So like I liked that idea of like almost like not necessarily collapsing the category of the girl, but kind of using the girl as this like symbol and like framework of thinking about online spaces. But yeah.
do you find that gender plays a role in your work?
Not really. I don't think it does. I funnily enough rarely talk about gender outside of just the kind of description that I just gave you. I guess I'm privileged enough in the sense that I don't think about it that often. It doesn't hinder me in any way. Yeah.
Fair enough. It's always interesting with these things, like how, because I've like we've been conceptualized as like feminist and stuff before as well, which I yes, but in I don't know like how to respond when it's like explicitly described that way.
You mean like with everyone as a girl, like do people sort of understand it as like a feminist sort of platform?
Yeah, like I've been brought like there's been instances where like guys will be like, "Oh, I write for it because I'm a guy." I'm like, well, of course you can. Like, it's not about that at all. But
That's funny.
yeah, it's quite funny. Yeah, but I just wanted to bring it up. Well, because I ask every time to see like what people think and why they've reached out to me. But I also think like we are kind of doing interaction design. So
yeah, no, definitely.
yeah.
And like especially in an academic sense, like that's kind of what I'm really interested in. Like how can I expand my practice in the way that goes beyond either text or people just kind of like obviously it's interaction design kind of by default just by the projects that I make and the way that people experience it, but also how do I sort of communicate my research in a way that's like more interactive, whether it's like a talk, a lecture, or like a performance in that sense. Like how does that, how do you sort of surpass, I guess, the sort of prescribed mediums of academia, which I thought that you guys were doing like really, really well. And also just this idea of like public speaking, like I find it genuinely terrifying, and like that's why I do it. Because it's like, something that it's not that I'm unfamiliar with, but there's always like a thing in the back of my head that's like, is everybody gonna hate everything that I say? And sort of like doing it more and more, like also kind of, I don't know, allows you to maybe internalize things a bit better because you're able to present them to people in a different way.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that you use subject for everything as well, obviously. Do you think that kind of plays into that link between like academic work and like a public audience or like interactive space, or like what role does Substack play in that process?
I think it predominantly came from like this desire to document my work. Like I was already sort of doing it as I was making the work, but then I was like, I'm writing as if I'm writing for an audience, yet nobody's gonna read this ever. Like it felt like I was writing to somebody. And I was explaining my practice and my processes, and I was like, oh, for example, I would be like, I read this thing, I found it really difficult, here's my understanding of it, here's why I agree with it, here's why I don't. And I realized that that process is really useful for me. And then I was like, okay, maybe if I, for example, put a project on my website and sort of start documenting my work, let's say on Instagram. Like I do a lot of videos on Instagram of me just like doing my work, and like I document it sort of visually, like through videos on Instagram. And then I also started thinking about all of the writing material that I'm producing for this. So if it's like a critical reflection of a project, or here's how I made it, here's all the research behind it, here's how this applies to the different concepts that I'm using, and here's how I'm materializing those concepts through a design practice. I thought that might be really useful for people, and it might be, again, another interesting way of engaging, like I've said, audiences in a sort of different interactive way. And also, I just really like writing, and I do so much of it, and it's just a shame to have it, dying on my hard drive somewhere. Yeah, and I guess it forges different connections as well. Like even with the stuff that I did for you guys, for Everyone Is Girl, that sort of came out of that, and from a desire to be like, here's all of my thinking that goes beyond the work. Like, what do you guys think? Sort of thing, like starting a dialogue.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking recently we should do like a reunion as well with everybody. Because there's just so many connections that were like, I think, beginning to weave at all those different sessions
Yeah.
that really continue.
And everybody was like so great. Like the amount of stuff that people are capable to talk about in 20 minutes is like actually mind blowing. And you never know what you're gonna get, because like somebody's abstract can be like, oh, I'm gonna talk about this, and then they just blow your mind, 10 minutes in. So it's just really cool to be able to participate in something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, couple final questions. If you were gonna like, it was like the end of your life, and you're gonna like literally, what is like one thing that you would want to, what is the message that you would want your work to like leave behind?
That, I think maybe that we're not so different from our environment. like, I don't think there's any way for me to like not sound like an actual hippie when I say this, but like everything around you is so beautiful and like so full of wonder, and you're like a part of it. Just because you have a phone, it doesn't, it doesn't make you any less part of nature. And I think if people had that relationship to the environment, the world would be potentially a better place. And that also sort of drives the way that I think about artificial intelligence. Like I think about all of this kind of stuff from a very ecologically driven place or mindset. So I think, yeah, you're not so different from your environment. And it's actually quite strange how not different you are from everything around you. So maybe that. How about
Awesome.
you? I wanna hear your answer to that if we have time for it. Like, what do you want people to? You're dying tomorrow. It's your final day.
My God. Just like beauty is everywhere. I don't know.
Yeah.
Life, like, it doesn't matter if things aren't beautiful. Like, that's my whole shtick. I feel like, don't be afraid to be selfish.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't be afraid to play.
Yeah.
Well, maybe.
The world's your oyster. And it's pretty. And everything can be pretty if you want it to be. That's my
Nice.
answer. Yeah. Is there anything that you want to say before we end? Or promo?
Promo. I don't follow me on Instagram. Go on my website. Read my stuff. But yeah, I guess that's it. I'm always trying to do more things, but a lot of it is just pending having more time, I think, as is with everybody, hopefully. But yeah, I mean, no, just thank you so much for having me. Like this is really cool. Yeah, and I enjoy everything that you make, and it's very nice to get to talk to you. So yeah.
This was so nice. Thank you so much. Have the best night.
Thank you. You too.
All right.
Bye.